Welcome to Poland Daily History. I'm here with Stefan Tompson, a British-Polish filmmaker, who's joining me in the studio to talk to us about his filmmaking and his life as a British Pole. Stefan, welcome back. You've made a number of films about the Polish-Ukrainian relations. What inspired you to delve into this subject?
Ukraine is a fascinating place. I'm every single time I say Ukraine, I'm tempted to say the Ukraine, but I know it offends Ukrainians who find that to be a remnant of the
we have to say Ukraine, not
Socialist Republic. So it is Ukraine apparently now. So I will try my best to not fail at that. It's a fascinating issue to me because my family, in fact, was very strongly linked to Lviv and to the nearby region of Lviv. And in that sense, I've always had an interest in that area. And the other thing that I've found fascinating is the mass migration from Ukraine to Poland. And in fact, that being very strongly linked, to me, there's a very strong resemblance between mass migration from Ukraine to Poland and between mass migration from Poland to the UK. So in that sense, there's a lot of empathy on my side. There's also a sort of geopolitical empathy and of wanting, obviously, to have Ukraine as a sort of buffer zone between us and Russia. I think that's one of the pet fears of Poles is obviously Russia and having Russia close to us. So those are some of the reasons that I found that area of the world to be very interesting. It's an area that I've traveled to a lot. I know Ukraine quite well. I've been there 5 years this year alone, mostly to Lviv, but I've been to Odessa, I've been to Kyiv, I've been to Zhytomyr. I've been to all sorts of places. I have traveled quite broadly around it. And generally, there's a very painful episode, which I think serves as a great warning. And that episode is the 1943 Volhynia massacre.
Yes.
Where some 200,000 Poles were very brutally murdered. And I think it's a fascinating topic because it's so deeply misunderstood by both sides, and in a sense purposefully misunderstood. On one hand, we have Poles who want to see themselves purely as innocent victims, and we have Ukrainians who try and present it as a Polish-Ukrainian war, which is also a very unfair way of presenting it. And I think as a warning from history, it's an incredible thing because analyzing it and the root causes of why neighbors suddenly from one day to the next turned and took very primitive tools to go and murder their neighbors, it's a very powerful thing. And I think it's a wound, it's one of those wounds. Poles have forgiven broadly the Germans. There's very little ill will in Poland, in my opinion, at least towards the Germans.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
I think even despite our dislike for Russians, I don't think there's particular ill will towards communism and towards the Soviet occupation, oddly, strangely enough. But the one animosity that has remained quite fervently, very strongly, surprisingly, is an animosity towards Ukrainians for the Volhynia massacre. And one of the reasons is that the Ukrainians haven't allowed exhumations to happen in that area of Ukraine. And there hasn't ever been a sort of official apology. There's been a lot of whitewashing in Ukraine. The Ukrainian nationalists have tried to sort of turn it over, and the people responsible for that massacre are considered heroes by a surprisingly strong number of Ukrainians. And I think that's, the Ukrainians are our neighbors, I think it's an important issue, and I think it's one that we need to resolve, and I think it's one that I have commented on, and I've asked Ukrainians about it, and in fact, my most viewed videos on YouTube tend to be on that matter. The 3-4 most viewed videos I have are on that subject.
What do you think it is that makes neighbours turn on each other with sort of a violence that you wouldn't necessarily turn on somebody you don't know? I mean, and is it linked to also sort of thinking more widely about how civil wars are always much more violent than wars between different countries?
The lessons that I think are to be drawn is that inevitable tribalism is very difficult to overcome. And in fact, it serves as a warning that we ought to sort of conduct policies of good neighborliness, and that very small things and willful misunderstanding of the other side, continued misunderstanding on a fairly small scale, can turn into I mean, basically the Rwandan case of Tutsis versus Hutus, of the Yugoslav case being another very recent case, similar brutality seen between people who were neighbors for centuries. And again, in Ukraine and in Poland, that to me seems to be the lesson of this inevitable, that we are tribal beings, and that tribalism is very difficult to overcome, and that we should generally strive for a sort of normalization and very clear definition of what our sort of boundaries are, what our rules are, what our expectations of the other side are. And that, I don't think, was entirely made clear. And this relation between Ukrainians and Poles, or between the Cossacks and Poles, or the Tatars and Poles even, if we stretching back 400 or 500 years and going back to the time of the what's described by Sienkiewicz and by Sword and Fire, of the Khmelnytsky rebellion. I mean, this is a long stretch of misunderstanding from, for example, Khmelnytsky and the Cossacks in the 1650s arguing that they should be entitled privileges of the Szlachta, which were refused, and that forced the Ukrainians into the Russians' arms. So it's a fascinating, a very small thing technically, which turned into a very huge consequences.
And these small things throughout history, they tend to become bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
The more people people forget about what the original dispute was about, the more excited they get. We fell out 700 years ago. We can't remember why, but therefore we must really have a big battle. We must get around murdering our neighbours. So that's sort of rather too light-hearted.
The British have an easier case because they're an island.
Yes, and of course we never fell out with anybody in our history. I mean, sometimes people like to fall out with us, which is very unsporting.
The French?
Yeah, the French. Well, yes, but you see, people misunderstand that this is just a friendly rival. It's gone back 1,000 years.
I mean, 100-year war?
Yes, well, that was okay as well. You know,
was it?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think we won. We won that, I think. No, but I think you're right, and this film, and in fact, I think even there's a version of the film, not your film, but a version of even on Netflix today, and it's of that massacre, and it is just when you look at these things, and of course, probably also it was also partly due to the fact you had this war between. Essentially, this area was caught up between the Soviet Union on one side and the Wehrmacht on the other, and where I think that particular part of Europe suffered some extreme brutality, far beyond anything we would have
but
ever
not
experienced.
Just during the Second World War. No. I mean, the Snyder describes it beautifully in the Bloodlands.
Exactly, yes.
But it's not Ukraine in a sense. It is the step. It's a continuous from Rzeczpospolita pushing east and then Russia pushing west, and basically it's been a bloodland for centuries.
So
it's a fascinating place. But generally speaking, I think it is an issue that needs to be resolved, especially with mass migration of Ukrainians to Poland at the moment.
Indeed.
And it needs to be resolved on both sides. On the Poles side, I think there needs to be an element of forgiveness. It's very worrying that that process hasn't taken place. And on the Ukrainian side, I think there is a need of taking responsibility, even though it is something that has happened a very long time ago. But it's pretty insufferable. I mean, going to Lvov and then seeing on Plac Kropivnitsky, one of the main squares of Lvov, seeing this monumental monument to Stepan Bandera, who's one of the ideological drivers of the massacre. I mean, you're talking about a 30-meter high arc and this sort of very fascist-looking monument to Stefan Bandera. It's actually quite awe-inspiring in a sense, but very. I mean, for Poles going there, I think it really is rather offensive.
So yes, I think that's probably a good point on which to end this section. But yes, we all need to sort of step back, take a deep breath, and try and recover from the injuries of yesteryear to make sure we don't repeat it in the future.
Yeah.
Stefan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.